What's up, everybody? Brambo here with a tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about the HypeChamber and going to go through kind of the basics, the 101s from a complete noob's perspective. Give a little background. I have no experience, very little experience in like Blender, 3D modeling and stuff. I haven't enough to manipulate and work around it, but I don't really know what I'm doing to really give a lot of tutorials like this, but it seems like not a lot of people have quite figured this out yet, so I figured I would help everyone and explain everything I know from a complete noob's perspective. Now, if you know what you're doing and I misspeak, please feel free to leave something in the comment and just correct me, because I think everybody knowing exactly the right thing versus just how it works and not is always better. But for this purposes, I think for everybody to get up to speed on the basics of how to do it, I think my tutorial is going to be pretty good. So first things first, as you can see, we're in the library part of the Unreal Engine. The first thing I want to say is if you have downloaded the broadcast sample already from the marketplace, I would say, and it's in the vault right here, I would say remove the local content and then create a project again and have it re-download, because apparently they've been updating this, and the only way you get the updated files is by removing the local content and re-downloading it. So every time you create a project, it runs it off of what you've downloaded already. Make sure you remove the local content and then re-download it before you start, because once you start a project, you can't really update the files and then work off that. It creates new folders. So you really have to have everything set up and ready to go. The other thing I wanted to mention about this is, before we get started, is this isn't like a fully well fleshed out piece of software. The one thing you got to keep in mind is it's janky at best. It's especially been described to me at people that know more than I do. It's janky, and you will come across problems where they just seemingly, it just doesn't work out of nowhere. I've been able to figure out some things here and there, and other people have as well. If you want to talk to a group that's been working on this stuff, there is an overlay, Rocket League overlay Discord. I will link in the description. They've been very helpful, and also you get good ideas off of them as well. But with that, why don't we just get started? Future Brambo here. One thing I did forget to mention is the Unreal Engine version 4.272 is the one you want to use for the broadcast sample for the HypeChamber. You do not want to use version 5. It will work, you can do stuff, but once you come to actually rendering it, it won't work at all. So keep that in mind. Use 4.272. A couple things you need to know as well. First up, these projects don't come with the Octane by default. It has what they call a Jaeger car. Nothing in the project files have any Rocket League assets by default. I think probably for some legal reasons or whatnot. So what I ended up having to do is download a Octane model from this wonderful gentleman, Victor Hernandez, who has made a wonderful model. The only issue with this model in terms of the HypeChamber is that the wheels are detached from the body. This is kind of meant for like something in Blender where the wheels are going to rotate separate from the body. But for our purposes, that's not going to work for us, because when you first import, and why don't we get this opened up and we'll while we're waiting. When you first import the model from Sketchfab, it will just be the Rocket League, the car Octane body, and not the wheels. And what I did was I managed to import the wheels, kind of align them to the car enough, and then export that file, FBX file, which is the file I'm going to be providing in the description, as well as the UV map for the car and the white is very hard to tell what's actually um, useful. But I had already pieced out every piece in this UV map that actually represents the car. The rest of the stuff is like the body, the underlayment, and you don't want to color this whole thing because if you do, the engine and other parts of the car are going to have like this that same color tint, and it's going to look weird. Unless you want that tint, go right ahead. But for my purposes, I'm going to be supplying a version of this file. It's the standard UV map, and it's a photo file, which is Affinity Photo, which is the software I use. But it should be able to work just fine in Photoshop or any photo editing tool of your choice. But we are in the HypeChamber now, so this is what it's going to look like for anybody else that goes into here for the first time. Now, to move around, you're going to hold left click. It'll move you kind of back and forward. You can kind of use this to kind of really get around without really doing much, as you can see. The scroll wheel will allow you to go up, down, left, right. And then the holding right click kind of moves the angle of your camera. So imagine your field of view is the camera, and you're kind of just manipulating around just to get an idea of what's going around. You don't really need to know that, but it's helpful to kind of get your bearings together. Now, my interface is going to look a little bit different from yours. I added some tabs in here that I use for when I'm browsing around here. Like this versioning utility is not here at first. We'll close that so I can show you what that's going to look like. Movie render queue, that's helpful for, you'll see why in a little bit. This will be default, the world outliner, but you don't need to worry about that right now. So by default, the content browser will be here. And all of the files that you're interested in are as an esports sample. And we're going to be moving across all three of these folders. But if you're in here for the first time, the first thing you're going to want to do is import that Octane that I have supplied you guys. So you're going to go into artist sample, artist elements, blueprints, cars. And as you can see, I already imported mine, but I'm going to make a folder here and we'll just show you what that looks like. Oh, no spaces. Something to keep in mind there. No spaces in any of this naming stuff. So we're just going to right click an empty space in here. I'm just going to import. Now I'm going to go to where my stuff is. So this is going to be the name of the file, Octane Complete. And you're just going to click OK, import all, doesn't matter. And you're going to see all of your resources. You're going to see tunnel metal. This is all these materials that come with the car. Now that's another key thing you're going to want to keep in mind for terminology while we're working in here. There are a few key terms that you're going to want to keep in mind in the back of your head. The first is textures. Textures are basically the pictures, the PNGs, the JPEGs, the 2D mappings of all of the things you see in this view. So the skin on this car, the URL on that stuff, that's a texture that then is put onto a material. And the material uses the texture provided, but also gives you the elements of like a glossy finish or a metal. It has like the 3D element and the world properties. And you'll see what I'm talking about once we kind of get more into it. And then the other thing is a static mesh. Now, as you can see here, static mesh is basically a term for a 3D model. So you'll see a static mesh used for the cars. You'll see a static mesh used for the 3D logos. But we're not going to go into the logos right now. The only thing we're going to be focusing on for this tutorial is the victory screens, the winner from the HypeChambers and all from the Rocket League or RLCS broadcasts. And so that's all we're going to focus on. And for that, you only need the UV map of the car and the marquee which basically is this Unreal Racing League Championship Series scrolling text. It's actually like 8,000 by 126 resolution image. And as you can see in here, I have, the Indie Gaming League and the team that we're going to be working on today. So that's also going to be provided in the files in the description. So static meshes. And then the last part is blueprints. Now, blueprints are a Unreal specific function. Basically, they operate as the overall control of that item, whether it's the car or the hype chamber itself. So we have the static mesh of the Octane imported, but that doesn't do much for us because now we need to add a blueprint for that car. So to do that, we actually need to, what I did was I duplicated the Jaeger. So when you duplicate, you have to rename it Octane example. So as you can see here, I created it, but now it still has the Jaeger in here. So we're going to double click in here. And for this tutorial, you're not going to need to do anything with this except for maybe this, but we'll get into that in a second. So, but the viewport or clicking on the SM car, which stands for static mesh car, we talked about that, is going to take you to where the 3D model of your car. And down here, you're going to see all the elements. These are the materials that are associated with that car. As you can see, you can switch it to that and change the skin. And these other elements are other parts of the cars, the tires, the chassis, the rims, and other aspects of the car. Now, that's just for the Jaeger. Now we're going to go into the Octane from our example. And as you can see, the elements are different. And also the other thing is too, the lights. So we go back to the car itself. We'll go back to the Jaeger. The lights are lined up directly. It's important to know for the car itself because those will actually make the lights, make it look like headlights. And you're going to need to know that when you actually get in here, because obviously when you bring the Octane in, that's not lined up. But all you have to do is just click on the headlight and arrange it. And then remember, we talked about the moving around. So I'm using the middle mouse to move in and right mouse now to line it up. Now you're going to need to use different perspectives to kind of give yourself an idea of where the headlight actually is. And then when you need to get that fine tuned, you can just click over here, and it's color coded as well. You see the X axis is this, the Y axis is here, and the Z axis is here. So I need to move this to the right. So we'll just tap it over. Now you'll see sometimes this is a weird thing. If you're moving it and it doesn't actually do anything, and it will keep doing that. So sometimes if you click on something else and then click back here, sometimes that fixes it. Yeah, now we can kind of fine tune. And now we're moving that back and forth. Got it fine tune. Now you see the light. It's actually producing that light source. We're going to get a better idea of where that is. Okay. And you're going to have to do that for every light when you import this. And as you can see, the material here, that's from the other thing we did. So now we're in the car. Now in the Jaeger, the blueprint, the element for the paint job is element 0. And I mentioned in this event graph, which is kind of like a node type thing. We'll get into that in a second. So I mentioned that element 0 on the Jaeger is the paint. Now for the Octane, it's the element 1. Now I already have some Octane skins put in here. So now that is the body. And best way to find out what materials what is to actually double click on the static mesh, and brings up another viewpoint over here, just adds another tab to this. If you want to see which each element is tied to, you can just click over here and isolate, or you can highlight it. But sometimes that doesn't give you quite the idea. So element 0 for the Octane model that you're going to import is the metal, all the metal pieces that you need to know about. And then element 1 is the body. Element 2 is the window. Element 3 is the trim of the car. It's going to be important later. And then we've got the rims for element 4. And then element 5 is the tires. Again, that's something you're going to want to keep in mind when you're working on this. But so now we know which elements tied to what. So for this, we want to change this. There's some built-in materials in here. So we're going to look for metal. And I like to use this metal. Nah, that's too. The way it looks in here is how it's going to look in the render. So you can get an idea of what you're looking for. There's a brushed metal that I like that's in here. Yeah, there it is. That's too brushed. Maybe it's not a brushed metal. You can play around with what works in here. But actually, now that we change it to a metal, you can see this light. Oh, another thing is too, so for the headlights, for the tail lights, if you notice in the Octane, there's actually 2. The tail light for the VictoryScreen is not that important because you're not going to see it. So if you want to skip this step, you can, but I figured I would point it out for if you did do something where you, in the render where you saw the back of the car, you might want to keep that in mind. So you're going to want to adjust these here and also duplicate and then put one here and then one here. So we got the elements for we got that. So we mentioned that was the window. So I'm going to type in here window, and there's already a nice material for that. And then for the trim, that's another thing. So also what I'm going to be providing you, we're going to save this and close. The other thing I'm going to be providing you are textures that were provided in another tutorial. That tutorial goes really fast. It's not as, they don't really explain, they more show what they're doing, but the materials they have in that example are very good. I'm going to link that video in the description. I'm going to include the textures that he provided in my zip file instead of you having to go through and download his. But to get there, so I'm back in esports artist elements. We're going to go to textures, and I already downloaded them. So we have the normal map. I'm going to rename them to something a little more, but these 3 textures are the textures for the wheel, for the tire itself. So we added the textures, and now we're going to go to the materials. And all I did was I copied the tire material. Oh, it's under materials, vehicle. I copied the Jaeger tire material. I duplicated it and then made an Octane version of that. And you'll see what that looks like in a second. Let's go back to cars, blueprint, to here. So we're going to go to the treads. So we're going to go tire, Octane tire. So as you can see over here, it's the opposite sort of what a tire tread should look like, but for the purposes of our tasks, it's good enough. If you have a better one, I would love somebody to provide a better texture, so leave a comment below. Then we're also going to fix the rims too. That's where I think I put the brushed metal. I think I put the brushed metal here. Could work for right now. Aluminum might, yeah, it's pretty good. So that's our overall look of the Octane. Now, I mentioned one thing we're going to change. This is the only time you're ever going to need to mess with any of this stuff is right here. Body paint material ID. By default with the Jaeger, it's 0, but for our cases, it's set to 1. This should work for you. It's not working for me right now. I don't know why, but worst comes to worst, all you're going to have to do is come into this blueprint, which is what I'm going to do in this tutorial, and change it manually in here to the team you need. So now we've got the car imported. We've got all the assets for the car itself. Now we need to get the team elements in here, the UV map that we just made for Redemption Esports and the marquee. So remember, we talked about textures, then materials. So I keep everything kind of in the same spot just for my purposes, like just to keep it in my, but you can put these files wherever you want, wherever it makes sense to you. But I just kind of, like I said, I keep it in the same area as the people who provided this. So just to help me make sense of everything. So I recommend you doing that as well. It really helps you just not forget what's what until you start getting the hang of it. So we're going to import our textures. So we're going to go in here. We're going to go to folder here. We're going to go to Redemption Esports. We're going to bring in these two assets right here. Just going to click those. Now you can see I already named them kind of a similar naming convention. See, if you notice in here, everything's named a certain thing. Now, T is for texture, MI stands for material, SM stands for static mesh. And when you're browsing through assets for different things, it's going to be very helpful, especially when you're trying to search for files. You'll know right off the top by the naming convention, that's a texture, that's a material. And for the marquees, I just left that for my own purposes. I know what it's for. And the other thing is too, it's a good idea to save these things as you open them, because if you notice there's a little star right there, that means it's not saved. If in the event of a crash, if you don't save anything, including the materials, the textures, any of it, you're gonna have to re-import that. So learn from my mistakes, save as you go so you don't have any issues. So we imported the textures, and now we're going to go into the materials. Now, once I get more familiar with when we need the logos and stuff, like the icon back here, we'll go into that. But for now, we're only going to focus on the marquee material and the car body material for the Octane. So what I do is I copy an existing top marquee, duplicate. I think the only difference between the top and the bottom is literally the text on it, but I keep, just for sanity purposes. All right, so we named that. Now we're going to double click it, and you can see like a sphere of text. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but you're going to go over here to your mask text, and you're going to click here, and then we're going to load up that texture. So we're going to look up I know my team name that I'm looking for is already in. So now you still can't really make out what it says right now, but you will in a second. So hit save and close. And then we're going to duplicate this as well. Now this is already set up for the Octane, so we'll delete this. We'll start from scratch. Pretend these aren't here. So what I did was I took a material from the Jaeger, from any team, doesn't really matter. And then I just renamed it. And then also I changed it from Jaeger to Octane, so we don't get confused at what car it's for. So this is one thing you're gonna like. These are some attributes that you might want to mess around with when you get a feel for it. But there's two important things you want to keep in mind. The first thing is the diffuse. That's where the texture is. So we're going to look for our team RDN, put that texture in there. Now, if you can notice, it's a little bit fuzzy, and that's because of this metallic field here. What I like to do personally, I've discovered, is like if you put it to about 0.5 around there, it doesn't matter exactly. You notice it gets a little bit sharper. I've noticed that when you render it at this setting for the metallic, the icons on the side of the car and stuff are much more crystal clear to see. Obviously, they did something different with their cars because their cars look amazing. But for what I'm doing with and how the UV map's set up, this works really good. Setting the metallic at 5.5, and it's still very shiny, as you'll see in a moment. Now we've got our materials, we've got our textures, we've got our materials. So now let's see what it looks like on the car. We're going to go back into esports sample, artist elements, blueprints, cars. We're going to go to my car, and as you can see here, I got the lights all set up properly. We're going to update this to already in. Boom, that looks nice. Except I want this trim to be red for the purposes of their car. So the way I do that is I make a new material. Now you're going to want to go out, back into artist elements, materials, vehicle. No, not vehicle. I apologize. So you can see here, I kind of made already materials for other teams. But what I did was I copied MI metal dark. I just duplicated that. And then I make the material for the specific team. That way I know what it's for. Otherwise, you're going to get very confused of what's what. And all I do is change the base color. So we're going to, that's a deep red. We want to, we don't want a pink. We want to, yeah, we want that. We want a bright red. Now, one thing to note, we talked about the metal material. If you did this with, if you wanted like a white trim, you can see it looks very silvery. Now again, the metallic, drop that down, drop that setting down, it gets more white. So if you want a white material, just turn the metallic down and you'll actually get that color that you're looking for. But we don't want that. We want some red. Ooh, that's a deep red. That's nice. Let's see what it looks like. Faded a bit. That looks good. We're going to save that. Close it. So let's go back into our car again. Elements, blueprints, cars, Octane, and click on our car or up in the viewport. And remember the trim was in element 3. So we're going to change this from dark to already in. Now we have our red material. Boom. That looks sweet. That looks just right. Exactly what I'm looking for. So we're going to hit save. And now our car is set up. But how do we render it? There's two. Well, we can't render it yet. But the first thing you need to know is you need to open the versioning utility. Now that's in esports sample, artist elements, and blueprints right here. You right click that, you run the utility editor utility widget, and it'll open it up here. Now this is the only place you can render. There is a sequencer and it will allow you, give you the option to render, but you will run into issues. Always render from this versioning utility. Now from here, it'll give you options, matchup, team HypeChamber stuff. For me right now, it doesn't actually switch any of the stuff that I'm looking for. But if you want to see what each scene is and what the actual thing's going to look like, all you have to do is go into esports sample, scenes, and whatever one you want. For our case, the victory, we're going to open up the LS level sequencer. So just double click on that. And now if you have the sequencer opened, which will be right here, you can actually see what this looks like. And you might have heard a little sound bite. I don't use that, but to each his own. So now you can see what that's going to look like. So, but when for here, we're going to change it to the team victory. And in here is where you can change the teams. So we're going to change it to SPS, HM, and then for stuff I've already done, we've got, we've got this car, the Octane car. And as you can tell, it's not actually, the text has the same as Unreal Racing League and not the actual team that's set up here. If you run into that problem, all you got to do is open up the blueprint for the Team Victory controller, hit compile, and close it. Now the team showed up. I don't know why that happens, but that's been happening to me a lot. But that's the way I fix it. And as I mentioned before, the car isn't changing for me, even though, just as proof, even though in here, actually, I don't have it set. Well, let's try. I was very afraid I was going to break things if I do that. But let's see. No, yep, see, now it works. Now it's updating that trim, the skin for each team. But again, it's not updating the text and it's not updating the trim. So you're going to still have to go into the Octane and tweak a few things. But how do we get the team list in here? So if you've read any of the documentation, which I will be linking in the description below because it's good to have all the materials you need, you're going to have to go into Artist Elements, Esports Sample Artist Elements, Blueprints, Data. Now this is one of the more important pieces you're going to need to remember. This is where all the data for like how it knows what color to set all this stuff to and the text to have in here. This is where all this is going to be stored, as well as 3D logos and all this stuff. So anything you're going to be doing for any of the other screens, it's all going to be derived from here. So we're going to add our new team. We're just going to click add up here. And I already made a code for them. This, you're going to need this for the drop down over here. And then once you have, you're going to double click here to add the code for the rest of the, but for the rest of the information, you're going to just edit in here. Redemption sports. And then you're going to change the actor from the Jaeger to the Octane. And then the logo and texture stuff you can just leave alone right now. Now this is where you need to pay attention a little more. So, you know, we talked about like, so for this team, it's a white. Make it, so it's going to be a white car with a red background, red trim. Now, this is all to your discretion at this point, but I think the background's probably going to look best as red. So we're just going to, now you can do this one of two ways. You can use the color wheel here and make a, you know, get the color right. Or what I do is I go into, I look at the logo or whatever specific color you want, and I go use the color picker. And I'm just going to make sure this red matches. And then I'm going to grab the hex code right here for that car. And then I'm going to import it into here. So in the color picker, you're going to want to paste it in this hex RGB, not hex linear, because it'll look off once you paste it there. Well, actually, in this case, it looks exactly the same. But sometimes when you paste it in here, it doesn't look quite the same as it does here. And that's usually because this, one of these two values, the saturation or the value, is off. And you can just mess with these sliders and kind of get it to the right setting that you want. But we have it in a good spot here. So we're just going to copy that. So that's the background. So that's this color. So, but we want our, and the fill is the same color. So we're just going to copy, paste right here, boom. And then our accent is these black lines and the, the black lines mostly. So we're going to make those white. So all we have to do is drag that down. Now we've got a full value. Again, palette 2 for fill. Now you can get fancy with this as much as you want. For my purposes, I kind of keep it simple because I do this every week. So I just need simplicity. So that's for this team. And then once you get those colors set up, the next thing is the car skin, home and away. It's not going to be any different for either one. So again, this is looking for materials. So this is the skin for the car. Put that in both home and away. And we're going to skip all this and we're going to go down to marquee top. Again, we're going to put in that team code. Now it's got all the material assets for that car. And we're done. Okay, we're going to save this. We're going to close out. And then we're going to find, no, That's because there's one extra spot that you need to put the team in order for it to show on this dropdown. So if you go to esports sample, artist elements, blueprints, and go to this enums folder, and go to en teams, you have to put it also in here. Don't ask me why. No idea. Same code that you have in the data table. And the description isn't required, but I do it. It's up to you. Again, we're going to save, close, and now hit the drop down. There they are. There is our team, but they are not the True Reapers. They are Redemption Esports. So we're going to go back to Esports sample, scenes, victory, and we're going to open up the team controller again. We're going to compile. There we go, Redemption Esports. Now, this is a perfect spot to take a look and make sure that everything is as you want. Now, for me, the text is a little washed out because it's white on white. So I'm going to tweak this a bit. But, if you like everything that you got here, feel free to just move on from this point and skip ahead. So we're going to fix that real quick. Text to the accents. I think I'm going to change the accents. Maybe make it this orange color here. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so we're going to open up the data table. We're going to change these fill accents from white. We're going to go with this palish gold that was in there. There we go. Do it. Same here. There we go. Save it again. And we'll just switch back from another team, and that looks better. Okay, that looks good. Now it's not as washed out. So now we're ready to render. Now you're going to want to pay attention to mostly make sure you're on the right team. And then this is the only other thing you really have to pay attention to here. Now, by default, these are the render settings. So by default, it's the default was 720p 444. That's Apple ProRes and preview. Now this is going to be a lower resolution at 720p. This is made for when you just want to render it real quick and see what it looks like and not spend all the time rendering it. When you're doing your final render, you're going to want to have it at the 444 non-preview version. Now, for me personally, I stream native resolution is 1440p. So what I had to do was, and in case you have to do this, I clicked on the 1080p 444. I just edited it. And then I changed the output. Well, as you can see, it actually changed the output as well here to 2560 to 1440. But, 1920 by 1080. And then by default, the frame rate's 24 FPS. I changed it to 60 because why not? And then also in here is where you can change your output directory where you're going to be saving this to. By default, I think it goes to wherever the project folder is. So you're going to have to pay attention to where this location is. But when you're ready, you can go File, Save As, and then you can save it to whatever you want. But I'm just going to save this just to keep this. So if you need to make changes to this, you can always just hit edit up here and change whatever you need. For my purposes, I do 1440p, 60 frames per second. And then all you have to do from there, start render. Now, pay very close attention to what's going on up here, because as you can tell, it's not the same thing that you just selected. This is another janky thing that happens for some reason. When you hit render for the first time, it will automatically switch to the default settings. I don't know why, but it does this. So, and also, if you notice in the movie render queue, if you need to get any of these windows, all you need to do is go to window up here, and the movie render queue is here, but like all the different tabs in here are all in this window menu. So in the movie render queue, it's already set up and it has all the settings from what just ran. So we're going to have to delete that. And then we have to go back into Team Victory, select our team, and pay attention to the text. It's not updated again. So we have to go back to esports sample, scenes, Team Victory, open up the controller, recompile. Now it's got the right one. Make sure you set the render preset to the right one that you need, and then start render again. And now if you notice, the text is right, everything's right. And if you need to wait a little bit and just see what the text shows, it's good to make sure. Redemption Esports, perfect. Okay, so we're good. Now, I have a little bit more of beefier machine, so this is going pretty quick. This might be slower for you. This could be an hour from now. This could be just the same amount of time, but we're going to cut to when this render's done, and we'll see you in a second. Okay, and we're back. So when the render's done, it's just going to close that render preview screen, and then you're going to come to here. Now, we finished the render, but we're not done yet. So let me move this real quick, just for my organizational purposes. All right, so there we have one problem with this video. It's 1.7 gigabytes big. Now, if you're not technically savvy, if you're trying to stream and then have your computer process a 1.7 gigabyte file, you're gonna probably run into some bottlenecks just for how big it is. You're gonna have it slow. It's not gonna look right. So the way we fix that is we're gonna convert it to a kind of a smaller file, and it's gonna be not as sharp, but for your streaming purposes, you're really not going to notice it. And what we're going to do is we're going to run this command that requires a program called ffmpeg. I'll provide a link to it again in the description. It's open source software. It's very powerful. It's even used in OBS by default. This is going to convert the file from that MOV Apple ProRes high fidelity file to a WebM. So ffmpeg.exe, this is the location of your original file. So for me, it's Redemption Esports, and then ls, is the name of the file. And then this hoopla here, again, I'll provide the link, provide the code, the line in the description. And I'm going to put it to where I put this. It's already set there. So, and then you just hit enter. It renders it, and then we'll be back in a second. Okay, it's done rendering. And now, as you can see, now we mentioned, remember, this is a 1.7 gig file originally, and now we're looking at 11 to 10 megs. And so this is the WebM version. As you can see, it's got a little bit of haze. It's not as sharp as this, but as you can see, even my computer is having it's not as sharp as it could be. It's still a little jittery because it's trying to load all that data that it doesn't really need for what you're trying to do. See, much smoother on that end. And you really can't tell the difference especially when you're streaming. It's not even the same high quality. And there you go. You are all done and ready to use that HypeChamber video for whatever you need. Oh, I almost forgot. There is one thing you want to keep in mind when you're closing the launcher. You're going to want to not save anything involving the Hype controller, the levels. So you're going to want to make sure you uncheck everything. Like you don't want to save the version utility, any of the level sequencers, any of the main stuff. These things you can change. It's not really a big deal. The reason is I have found sometimes when you save the details or whatever for that, the next time you load it up, it won't render. I had an issue where the render would start and then it would just sit at the screen. Like the camera itself was busted. I don't know why, but keep that in mind. Don't save any of the blueprints or the level blueprints or any of like that main stuff that you're dealing with. Unless you're doing custom work, then, do as you please, but word of warning to you. And also, there's no shame in starting back over again. All right. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments below and I will be happy to respond. All right. Thanks for watching. My name is Brambo. You have a good one.